Good morning. My name is Malcolm Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. Welcome to the Forum. It's been 6 years since Occupy Wall Street brought international attention to the vast and growing divide between the rich and the poor, the 1% and the 99% in the US and the world. While we don't hear as much about the Occupy movement these days, inequality is still a very real problem for us. And in San Francisco, one of the most expensive cities in the world, we face the consequences of this inequality every day. But what if you're on the very bottom of the 99%? What if you don't have a bank account or a credit history? What if it's impossible for you for these reasons to rent an apartment or buy a car? A large number of minority, immigrant, and low-income people do not have bank accounts, credit histories, or what they need in order to be part of the financial system. Our guest today, José Quiñonez, is the founder of the award-winning Mission Asset Fund, and in 2016, a recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship, more commonly known as a Genius Grant. He is here today to talk about his vision and creativity as a financial service innovator, and how it brings communities across the nation out of the financial shadows and into the financial mainstream, so that everyone can participate in the American economy and the American dream. Please welcome José Quiñonez.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're so grateful to have you. We really appreciate the work that you're doing, and I'm glad for any chance for people to learn more about it. This year, every year the cathedral has a theme, and the theme for this year at Grace Cathedral is the gift. And so we had been thinking about, what is outside of the market? What are those things that we share and give and receive that aren't exchanged, they're things that we bought or earned or anything like that?
Or monetized.
Yeah, completely. Not taxed, exactly. In certain publications, you've written a saying in Spanish, cada quien tiene un don, which is everyone has their own gift.
Right.
What do you think your gifts are? And what are some of the gifts of the people that you work with?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you were able to sort of pick up on that phrase, because that's actually very fundamental to everything that we do at MAF. Is that that when we engage with our clients, people that are low income, sort of struggling to make ends meet, just trying to survive in in our world of today. What we try to do is not talk to them or think about them or look at them as the other, as this sort of like this broken people, or this people that we need to fix in some way, or people that we need to sort of save, right? I mean, that when we do that, I think we sort of miss the opportunity of actually looking at them as whole people, as persons, that are living life, trying to survive and trying to carry on with their life. But so in order to make that clear, we basically have to sort of acknowledge that we all have, cada quien tiene un don. It's like we all have, our internal spirit. And, the closest translation that I've gone to it to try to describe what that phrase means is that, in English we have like the similar saying. It's like, we have a little light of mind, right? This idea of our own spirit, our own, personhood. And then that needs to be sort of acknowledged. And I think we do that a lot in our world. But for some reason, when we're thinking about, poverty, or people that are poor, people that are struggling financially, that is one of the last things that we talk about them, about them. We talk about them in all the issues and all the problems that are facing, because we need to address those things. But hardly ever do we say, oh yeah, you are a human being. You are a person, another person that is walking this earth alongside of us, right? And so for us to sort of lift that up is to try to say, let's start there. Let's recognize each other's humanities first, and before we start talking about, how to solve this or that issue or that problem.
Right, I love that too. I mean, every person is utterly unique, and you're right, we all have our own gifts from our own history and our own experience.
That's right.
I think one of the biggest gifts that you have to share is, I think you're a real bridge builder between different worlds. You function so well in kind of the, industrial capitalist world of higher education. You've been educated at Princeton and UC Davis, and at the same time, you also are able to communicate with people who are really suffering, and to understand their needs and make connections between those two worlds.
Right.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just what your childhood was like, and how that has prepared you for what you're doing today.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the bridge builder. I mean, because I think that's, nowadays we need more of that. Instead of talking about barriers and pushing people out or walling ourselves off from the world, that we actually need to be, constant bridge builders in all aspects of our lives.
What I was thinking about is Robert Putnam is a sociologist from Harvard, and he talks about two different kinds of social capital. He talks about bonding social capital, which creates a strong group identity, and bridging. And he says basically, if you just have bonding social capital, then all you have like it's like Bosnia all over the time.
That's right.
It's just, and so that bridging is such an essential part of our life together.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, part of my background, so I was born in Mexico. I came to this country as a 9-year-old, 1980. My family came to San Jose, after both my parents had passed away.
Yeah.
And we lived in San Jose, undocumented for many years. And it wasn't until like 1986 when President Ronald Reagan at the time, he actually signed a law giving undocumented immigrants at that time, amnesty for people that came to the country before 1982.
Right.
So our family sort of made that cutoff. And
by 2 years.
Yeah, by 2 years, right?
Yeah.
So, in a sense, I mean, we all felt very, fortunate that happened because, with legal status, we were able to sort of, really, be a part of the world. And it happened to me at a time when, I was just starting to think about college and thinking about my future, thinking about what I wanted to do in my life. And so I was fortunate in many different ways that had happened to me at that time, because when I was 15, that's when I aspired to go to college, and then I set my sights on UC Davis, and I was able to continue that. So I was able to sort of continue with my whole educational career uninterrupted, or without that issue of my legal status as a question. But living life and what I call in the shadows, in the periphery, in the margins of society early on, it taught me a lot. Taught me a lot about the nature of life, in the shadows or in the margins, but also taught me about the resiliency, the sort of what people need to do to survive in the shadows is actually quite amazing. And so part of what I've done in my career is to basically be that bridge builder, but to translate that reality so that policymakers can understand that better. To basically say, sometimes poverty is not the fault of poor people, but sometimes that's what we think. That's what we believe. It's like, well, they just didn't do this enough, or they made this mistake, or if only if they were to do what we did, then maybe they would be in a better situation. I mean, those are the concepts that underpin a lot of our social policy, really, and how we think or judge people that are poor. But having lived that life myself, I was like, well, sometimes, life just comes at you without you making that decision or that decision. And then sometimes a lot of us just sort of are just struggling to survive or to make ends meet, or just trying to cope with what life, throws at you. And it has nothing, there's no fault of their own. But I think in society, we tend to fault them right off the bat, right? And so what I've tried to do is to say, well, there are different situations, different realities, and really part of my work is to try to bring light to that, and trying to say, like, how do we change that, the way we think about those realities, so that we can help them a lot more efficiently and more effectively. So I kind of bring my experiences early in life really to everything that I do, in my current work.
We have, on Thursday night, we had an immigration panel, and one of the women we had who was talking about her experience as an immigrant is a DACA student whose name is Carmen.
Yeah.
And she was talking about it was almost like, I think it was hard for people to understand her at first, because, she was talking about basically being in high school and going to classes, and her parents never get into trouble, don't hang around school, don't join the volleyball team, come right home. because they were so worried that something would get the attention of the authorities and they would be deported. So, I mean, she was talking about how much that limited her high school experience. I mean, she couldn't be a high school cheerleader or be on the math team or anything like that. I wonder, I mean, was there, did you have was there a big difference in your life when you got that immigration status? I mean, because your siblings were experiencing it at different times in their life, and I wonder what it was like for all of you as that change happened for you.
No, I mean, I totally relate to that. I mean, I think this is like when you live life in constant state of fear.
Yeah.
In constant state of panic that you don't know whether making a right turn here or left turn there is going to end up in some situation you may not be able to control anymore. And so, I mean, growing up, I was taught to exactly the same lessons, stay away, stay under, hidden, don't make yourself too noticeable, be small, be unheard, just stay on the sidelines, but those are strategies again for survival. But what happens is that as you develop as you grow up and you develop your person, those things kind of, diminish your potential, right? Because you have to sort of, again, be small and be unheard, but imagine that. It's like, imagine you're walking around, the world and there are people there you cannot see and just because they don't want to be seen. But I think as a society, we're actually being robbed from their potential. Because of Carmen, I mean, I wonder what her true potential is. Right. Does she have the skill or the passion or the ability to be this, a fine doctor or a fine artist or a fine musician what is her human potential that we're not going to experience as a society because we want to kind of keep her locked in, hidden on the side. So that to me is the biggest travesty, right? It's like
it distorted her. She's not a shy person, but she seems shy. Right. But it's almost like she was trained to be that way.
Exactly. Yeah. No. And as we all were, so for me, because of we were able to get amnesty in '86, that sort of pressure to keep me bottled up just went away from one day to the next. And I was able to sort of see the world and all its possibilities, for what they were. And then the question was like, well, what is it that I want to do as a human being, right? As a person, as an American, as a citizen to the society. And so I was able to sort of, channel all of my passions into social justice work, because I didn't want to just, go to Wall Street and make tons of money, because I could have done that and I had the potential.
Completely. Yeah. Especially when we graduate. I mean, those investment banks were hiring people left and right.
They were. I mean, they came to our class and they were like, I want to talk to you. I was like, no, I don't want to talk to you guys. I want to go on this path. But a lot of friends, a lot of my friends kind of went down that route, and that's fine. But what I wanted to do, and then I knew this early on, is that the realities of people that are poor is really starkly different than what we think of them as a society.
Yeah.
And when there's a disconnect between those two things, there's a lot of problems for misunderstanding each other and also for creating, even creating things even worse, right? So I've really dedicated my career, to try to kind of bring a little bit more coherence to those, so that we can, acknowledge their issues and acknowledge the problems, and then bring some good ideas, that can actually, be impactful in their lives.
Yeah. And how did that coming to consciousness happen for you? So, I mean, in high school, were you politically active in the way that you were in college, or was it in college that you got? How did it start to unfold? I mean, we were talking before about how when you're in college, you have this little side issue. Right. It turns out to be the whole thing. You think that your statistics class is what's really important, but really it was being a student activist that was most important.
That's right. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, if there was any given point, but I went to 3 different high schools. I graduated from Mount Pleasant, went to Leland, went to Willow Glen. I was being bused to try to help that, desegregate the schools at that time. I don't know if you remember that era.
Desegregation.
Yeah. And so, but at every time that I went to a new high school, I was always the outsider. I was always the new kid. I was always the one that had to figure out what is the state of the play here. What are the people I can hang out? Yeah, what are the rules? And so, but at every chance that happened to me, I had to sort of re-emerge myself into something different. But I always had a sense of, in the sense of this, the injustice of what happens when people are on the outside, being constantly the outsider. And so, and I think, I mean, yeah, even in high school, I remember arguing with some of my history teachers. They're like, that's not how I think about the history.
Right.
I argued not, in a nice way, not in a total
Yeah.
confrontational way. But I think I always had that sense of like, wait a minute, there's another side to the story here. Wait a minute, but what about X? What about Y, right? And trying to bring a different sort of narrative to the conversation. And I also remember thinking, this was like in my elementary days when, my name is José Ángel. That's, José Ángel Quiñonez Soto, right? But I knew that, a lot of people had a very difficult time saying my full name, José Ángel. So I said, okay, fine, let's compromise. You can just call me Jose. But some people wanted to call me Joe. And I was like, why do you want to call me Joe?
Gosh,
It's like, my mom didn't say that when she was writing that in my birth certificate. He's going to be, henceforth, he's going to be known as Joe. I was like, no, don't do that to me. At least call me Jose. Call me Jose Angel if you can. That's fine. But that's my identity. Don't take that away from me. So I don't know where that came from, but I always had a sense like, this is who I am. I'm willing to give some, but don't start calling me Joe. Call me something that I'm not. So that sense of who I was, I think it was from early on, and in every situation, every environment I was at, I always try to sort of fight for that, preserve that. I mean, when I went to Princeton, that was completely in a completely different environment where. I'm talking about the 1%. I mean, this is like the percent of the.
Oh, I know. I just went there for the first time a couple months ago. And I had that experience too.
Yeah, it was like this cathedral, but the whole campus, right?
Right.
I mean, it's total phenomenal university, but it was just like the shock of being in that type of environment. Given my background, I had to sort of figure out, okay, how do I survive here? How do I make something of it? But also, how do I bring something to the table?
Right.
And I think that the way I try to do that is to say, well, here's who I am. Here's my experiences. Here's how I survived these situations. But here are the broader lessons in my own journey, so that I think other people in that environment can actually take something from that.
Yeah, definitely. What are some of the most memorable classes that you had at Davis and Princeton? Were things that stuck out that you learned in those places that became helpful?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at UC Davis, I was very thankful that I was able to. I found a very nurturing community of students and professors and staff at UC Davis that really took a lot of interest, in me, and a lot of those individuals believed in my potential before I believed it. I mean, I always look back at this one event that happened to me when I was a junior at UC Davis, where I had a session with a counselor. It was a 1-hour session with her, and then she basically plotted out my life for the next 3 or 4 years. Wow. I hadn't met her before, and I didn't think I had talked to her after, but she said, she basically asked me the question like, so Jose, and this is after I was, very highly known on campus.
Right,
I was known as the
student leader. Exactly.
Yeah, and so she knew me. She knew how I was already performing at that level. But she asked me the question. So Jose, what do you want to do? After college, what do you what are your plans? And I was I remember answering basically saying, well, I think I'm going to go to Sacramento, go to Sac State, do some sort of graduate program there. And as soon as I said those words, I remember she stopped me, mid sentence. She's like, no, you're bigger than that. You're better than that. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I thought that would be a good answer for you, right? I want to go to grad school. It's like, I thought you wanted to hear that. Yeah. And then she's like, no, here's what you're going to do. And then she said, you're going to go to the Summer Institute at Princeton. And then after that, here's this other public policy career that will be good for you. And then she literally laid out 3 years of my life there, and then I actually did exactly what she said. But I think about that moment, thinking like, well, what if that hadn't happened? What if this person, what if she hadn't taken any interest in me in my life, or what I wanted to do? And I probably would have gone to Sacramento, and I probably would have done it, and I probably would have been fine. I would have been a happy individual in that other realm, right? But a lot of aspects of my life have been really defined by that, by having this sort of caring community kind of coming in and providing that guidance that I needed to do what I'm doing now. So I had that experience at UC Davis, and I'm really thankful for that. I mean, at Princeton, it was similar. I mean, I was able to connect with some professors that were just, tremendous in the field that actually gave me a lot of insights to the work that I'm actually doing now.
Yeah.
So I was able to also connect with other individuals to kind of give me a guidance that I needed at the time.
Yeah. It seems like a great preparation for what you ended up doing. I mean, how did the Mission Asset Fund kind of come into being, and how did you begin your connection to it?
Yeah, it's a
Maybe
great
you could
story.
talk a little bit about the need too. I mean,
Yes.
I know you have a zillion statistics and numbers in your head about, what it feels like to be in that financial underclass where you don't have access to loans, where you can't get a car loan or rent an apartment or what have you.
No, yeah. So when the Mission Asset Fund started, it was because the Levi Strauss company. They sold their last factory in the U.S. That it was on Valencia Street, and that was in 2005. And what they decided to do, thankfully, was to reinvest part of the proceeds of that sale back into the community. And so what they wanted to do is basically help, immigrant workers, people that either worked at their factory or people that looked like people that worked at the factory, helping them build and improve the financial security. And so in 2007, they basically hired me to basically make that happen, right? And I love that idea. I love the mission to say, well, how do you help low-income people build their financial security? And that was the question. So when we started our work, we're like, well, how are you going to do that when in fact low-income people, when they don't have much income, or they're or they're unbanked, or they have no credit score, that where they don't have access to the most basic financial tools, how do you actually help them build their financial security? And so we found that in the mission, about 50% of Latino immigrants in the mission had no checking accounts.
Wow.
Okay, no checking account, no savings. They were completely outside of the system. There was also a report done, at that time, where they found that 44% of mission households had no credit history or no credit score. And so at that point, I realized, oh my God, how are you going to actually do this when literally half of your targeted, audience or market, they don't have the access to make the access to the most basic tools. So we figured that we needed to do something really creative, because it wasn't enough to sort of say, oh, you know what, all we're going to do is to kind of teach you how to balance your budgets, or we're going to give you another brochure on how to open up a checking account, or kind of, do that sort of, that approach. Because at conventional wisdom at that time, that was exactly what you needed to do.
Educate people.
Yeah, because there is something
they don't
obviously
know about
they don't know
checking
enough.
accounts. If you tell them about checking accounts, they'll go and get them.
Exactly, because we know better, because we went to the fancy schools and we read the fancy books, and somehow they're doing something bad. And so, and then I think we had the intuition to say, like, actually that's the wrong approach. So we basically rejected that conventional approach, and basically said, if you really think about what people are doing with their money, it's actually, they're very innovative in their approach of managing money in the ways that we don't even are aware of. And because on budgeting, I mean, there's a lot of families that budget not just for their own households, but another households in another country and with another denomination, right? So they know more about budgeting than we give them credit for. They know how to track their every dollar, because every dollar they've worked for it. They know what it means, and they know more about exchange rates than many of us do. And they even manage and save money in ways that we never thought before. I mean, again, a lot of conventional wisdom has it that poor people just don't save, and we had the sense that actually people do save, but not in the ways that we think they're saving. And so that's when the idea, when we had the idea of coming, of sort of highlighting, this lending circle, this very informal, traditional way that people come together to basically borrow and save money together. In Mexico, they call them tandas, cundinas, susus. I mean, this activity happens all over the world, where people come together and then they agree to pool each other's resources. And then each of the members in this circle basically takes a pot of money. And then every month or every week or bi-weekly, in whatever time frame they decide to do that, another person takes a pot of money.
So it would be like 5 families together. And they would each put in $200 in a year. And then each year, one family would have the chance to have that whole pot.
Exactly. Or they do that on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis. So, so that family, those families, they determine how often they do that. And so, and then they do that based on their sheer trust. And so this is what Robert Putman, I mean, I actually read his book Bowling Alone when I was in grad school, and I was thinking, well, social capital comes in a lot of different forms.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember actually writing an article about it, kind of disagreeing with some. I mean, you don't disagree with Putman because he's actually the authority, right? But in my paper, I was like, well, poor people also have social capital, not just rich people have it.
Right.
Because we have it, because we actually need it to survive.
Right.
Because if you don't have social capital, if you don't have that connection or that relationship with somebody else, whether you're your family or your community, it's harder to survive by yourself in poverty than not. Right? So we depended on that. And so the lending circles is exactly a manifestation of that, where those 5 families, by their sheer trust, by their connections, their relationships with one another, they actually follow through with their commitments of putting in that pot of money, right? And so our insight was to say, like, how do we elevate that activity in a way that we can actually not just marvel at it or take pictures of it and say how great it is, but how do we give them something more of meaning, right? So this is another academic that I read while in grad school was. He came up with this idea of formalizing informality as a strategy for development. He's an economist from Peru. His name is Hernando Soto.
Right about him.
Yeah, and I was like, this idea of formalizing informality as a strategy for development. I thought I was awesome, right? And so we basically applied that idea in lending circles. So where we took this informal way of people lending to each other, where only they knew about that, to say, well, if we were to formalize it, where all those individuals sign a promissory note, we were able to sort of recognize it, so that way we can start reporting to the credit bureaus.
Right.
Because the activity of paying into the pot was exactly the same thing as when we take a loan from a bank.
Exactly, making monthly payments on your car or house.
Exactly.
So recording that suddenly gave them a history and record. That's
exactly
beautiful.
right, and that's exactly the idea. So say, well, if the payment is exactly the same, well, why is one being recorded and reported, and why is the other not? Right? Because there's exactly the same activity of paying back, and then we had the insight to say, like, well, because credit reports and credit histories are so heavily dependent on payment history, well, here's an activity that is common to our community, but is not being recorded. So that was the essence of lending circles. To say, well, let's record it and report it to the credit bureaus, so that way we can actually help people build and improve their credit scores while doing what they're already doing with their money, which is coming together and lending and borrowing money with each other.
Does it also help in terms of getting more people involved in lending circles? I mean, because it just makes it it shines a light on that practice.
No, definitely. I mean, in the past 8 years, we've helped more than 7,000 people, through our program, and not all of them have done lending circles before. Maybe about a third or 40% of them have, but the vast majority haven't, right? But people love to participate in it because it's a group process.
Right.
We're building community. People are helping each other.
Right, exactly. If I help somebody be able to send their child to college, I feel like, hey, that was part of my $20 too. Or,
that's right. And so instead of talking to them as pobrecitos or as like broken individuals, as like we're the ones helping them, no, we set a process for them to help each other.
Yeah.
And then so people, when they come through the program, they come out, walking with a little spring on their step, right?
Because a new sense of pride.
Sense of pride, sense of belonging, a sense of mattering, a sense of like they're doing something for their neighbor, they're doing something for each other, and people love that. But notice, like, when we most of our programs and services to poor people, we're the ones acting on their behalf. We're the ones sort of doing something to help them. But hardly ever do we talk about, well, how about them helping themselves, or helping each other in a ways that is relevant into their lives, because that's also important in our development. As human beings, like we need to be sure that we're that we're there for each other, and so that's part of the process, right?
It's human meaning. I mean, it's just it's creating a context so that people can make a meaningful difference in their own lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what's happening. So but for us as a nonprofit, we say, well, we'll set the process, we'll set the parameters. This was going to be a zero interest, zero fee loan.
Right.
And then whatever losses we'll take. So we're sort of like a mini FDIC.
Yeah, you kind of guarantee the loans.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We'll guarantee it. Just to give you peace of mind. nothing funny is happening here, and the only thing funny is that we're reporting it to credit bureaus.
Right.
That's funny.
That is funny.
But
that helps make the transition from one of those worlds. I mean, again, it's a bridge.
Yes.
Because you can function perfectly well in that one world of credit.
Right.
But what happens when you do want to get the car and the
Right.
loan from an official?
Yeah, no, and I say that's funny because it is, it's kind of odd, right? It's like, oh, we're, how, we lend and borrow money to each other. Like, we're actually sending it to Experian, Equifax,
Yeah, right.
and TransUnion, right? And, at first people were like, oh, are you going to send it to the alternative credit bureaus and blah, blah. I was like, no,
just
this
a
is
big
bona fide financial activity. I want these payments to actually affect their FICO scores, not their whatever other scores, not the Credit Karma scores, like the FICO scores. Why? Because 90% of lenders look at FICO scores to determine their decisions on loans. They don't look at the other funny scores. They look at the FICO score, right? So we said, in order for this to be meaningful, it's like that's what we wanted to do, right? And of course, when we did it, people were asking, it's like, well, what is Experian going to think about your work? Because it sounds kind of funny, right? And I was like, well, it is. But in the past 5 years, I actually sit on an experienced consumer advisory council.
Right. I thought that was good too.
Right. So I get to sit with the CEO of Experian
exactly.
and all those people.
You know exactly what he thinks about it now.
Exactly. Not only that, but they actually, uplift this idea, this practice as a good way to get people into the door because unbeknownst to us, we were actually solving one of their problems as well, which is that they needed to get more people into the credit system, particularly new immigrants, because there was a lot of financial institutions that actually want to work with people in the financial system. So we said, well, here's an idea of how we actually can expand the pool of eligible borrowers for them. So it's a good idea for them. It's also a good idea for the financial institutions because they actually want to lend money to this community, either to buy that car, or buy that house, or to start a business. And it's something that we say we actually want them to do that because they're not going to get it from us. They're not going to get a mortgage from us or a loan to buy that car from us. We actually want them to go to Chase, to Citibank, to
Wells Fargo.
Maybe not Wells Fargo. They're kind of,
We'll get to that later.
It's a different conversation. But we want them to be treated just like we would want to be treated, right? So with and also access to those the services. So it's a win for them, but it's also a win for our clients. But because we're doing it in a way that is empowering, that's what was meaningful to us. I mean, in the state of, in the course of, 10 months, we've seen that people's credit scores are improved by, on average, about 168 points.
That's amazing.
And they go from 0 to 600 within, 6 months. To 6 to 10 months. I mean, the default rate of our program is like, 0.7%.
Right.
The industry standard, in the micro lending world is more like 14 to 15%.
Yeah.
So our default is like 0.7, like less than 1%. I mean, so a lot of different metrics I can show that demonstrate that, the program has been extremely successful. But what I'm most interested in is not necessarily just that, because again, we've proven that success. It's more about, here's a different, more effective way of engaging people that are poor without demeaning them, without belittling them, without taking away their dignity when they're asking for help, or when they're actually engaging in help, and then presenting them a way of actually for them to help themselves, so that we can help improve or develop their human potential. That is the untold story that I want to sort of still figure out how to tell, because that's I think presents a lot of lessons, not just in the finance world, but in the way of housing, in the way of addressing housing issues, or education issues, or criminal justice. Like, how do you engage people in a different way?
There's somewhere you write about just that when companies make financial products, they're designed for wealthy people, and you're right. I mean, how do you have that change of consciousness so you define every kind of product for people who may not fit into those categories? And I love that. I mean, in a way, what you're talking about, you're saying this is a beautiful technology for this, but it's a kind of challenge to all of us. What are those other technologies, other ideas that will help and give life to poorer people?
That's right. Well, it's about it's a mental shift that we need to do, right? And to sort of say, you know what, we may not understand. And that's hard for us, in the U.S. to sort of admit that we're wrong in some things. But it's like to say, like, our concept of, our understanding of the realities of poor people is wrong.
Yeah.
And so how do we understand it better so that, whether we're developing products, financial products, or we're developing programs, social programs, or government policies, so those can be better informed with that reality in mind. And so that's really what I'm trying to sort of elevate the lesson to that level, so that it's not just about financial products, but it's about, when we're thinking about, childcare, or when we're thinking about food stamps, or when we're thinking about whatever other issues, like
housing.
housing, how do we reframe it, so that we can actually help elevate that person, instead of demeaning them, in the way that we're doing it now.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I thought of just from your own experience too. What are some of the things you think poor people know that other people may not know? I'm just thinking of all the different jobs you've done in your life and the work you've done in your life, and you learn something from it. I just didn't know if you'd ever thought about just explicitly what were some of the lessons, because. Yeah.
It's a good question. I think part of I think we have a more of a clear sense of the systemic problems or the barriers,
right?
Or the pitfalls in life,
right?
And because we're constantly trying to navigate around those
barriers
things.
to participation. You're right, because how many wealthy people realize that how hard it is to have a credit score,
exactly.
and then be able to have access to lending.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of barriers, a lot of pitfalls, and then and in order to make it, you have to sort of mix and match a lot of income sources just to make it happen. So there's a lot of that. It's a lot of juggling of things around. And I think there's good lessons within that, because there's some of the strategies are very innovative in it themselves. But I just want to sort of uplift the idea that or kind of push the idea that poor people are just somewhat broken or somewhat deficient, or somewhat the poverty is somewhat their fault. Because they're not they don't have good character like we do, right? Mm-hmm. Because we have good character because we're the ones that are successful, and that's proof enough of that. And I was like, that idea is what we need to sort of get away from, to sort of say, actually a lot of people, and even more people in the future, if we continue on this process, are going to be suffering, because the economic structures are changing, jobs are going to disappearing, automation is happening not because of their fault, but because of technology itself. Yeah. So there's going to be even bigger problems that people are going to confront, and so we need to sort of figure out how to align with the realities, so that we as a society can address those issues more effectively.
Yeah, this is a problem for growing numbers of people.
Exactly.
It's funny because I came from Mountain View. We used to see those Google cars on the streets everywhere, and you came to San Francisco, you didn't see any of them. And now they're here. Right. And it's only a matter of time before 1 million drivers are out of jobs, because computers can drive trucks across the country and drive taxis, et cetera. Yeah. And you're right. So how do you, and I really do believe people are smart. It's just like they do the best they can within the context they have. So how do you create a context where they can thrive and have a sense of dignity, a sense of contribution?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's funny to think. I was thinking of the gift of immigrants. And that's one of the gifts, is that you're giving us, and that the communities that you serve are too. Is like, how do you figure this problem out of human meaning?
That's right. And in studying their strategies of survival is going to inform how the growing number of people that are going to struggle, how they're going to also do that, because in their context, in their realities, it's all about being rational. They're the most rational economic actors that we can think of. Right. But we never talk about them like that, right? We always talk about them as again, in their deficiencies, but in their rationality, we see their strategies, and those strategies are going to inform how other people are going to do the same thing. So there's a lot of gifts there, a lot of lessons there, a lot of things we can learn. But what I want to always underpin is that, at the bottom, at the end of the day, they're human beings. Right. They're people. They're people that have faced a lot of different challenges, and just because of that, they're not less than who we are. And it doesn't take away their humanity, it doesn't take away their spirituality, or it doesn't take away, as one of the issues is we've never really seen their true selves. And so because of that, as a society, we're less than because of that. Right. But I think we need to sort of change the way we think about them or engage with them, so that we can allow more and more people to really be who they are as people.
What I keep thinking in the back of my mind as we were having this conversation is there's so many people in the middle of the United States who are being displaced in the Rust Belt, workers, and there has been such a tendency to kind of lash out against immigrants, to scapegoat immigrants, when really there's a chance to learn from these experiences about how they might thrive also. When you became got your legal documents in 1986, it was a Republican president who signed the law. Exactly. How have things changed, and do you think, and why have they changed, and what is your take on what's going on with that scapegoating, et cetera?
Well, that's a big question. I've pondered that question many times, and I think to my mind, what is a driver of it all is this fear.
Yeah.
This fear of the other, this fear of losing something. And I've always tried to say, there's really, that fear is unfounded, in a lot of ways, because I think, as America grows, as we expand as a society, and as we try to really live out, the true meaning of this notion of what America is, I think we're all going to be better off, when we allow, every person to develop to the full potential. But I think the fear of the other, the fear that we're losing, the fear that, that I'm gonna be less than. I think that drives a lot of that politics, and I'm really saddened by that, because, I think we all want to contribute. We all want to be a part, of America, and we all want to be a meaningful member of America. We don't want to be on the fringes, on the sides, on the shadows, and so. So I think we need to sort of address that fear that people have of people that may not look like who they are.
Right.
But I think I think at the end of the day, America is this idea that doesn't belong to anybody. America, is a beacon
open
of hope.
Source. It's open
It's
source.
open source, and I think that's the genius of this country. That is not, that we've actually folded in a lot of different groups, a lot of different points, throughout our history. Not always peacefully, right? There's always a challenge, there's always a struggle between that. But there was a time when Irish were not considered white. There was a time when Germans were not considered white. There was a time when others were everybody else, right? And so, but we found a way to fold everybody into the fold. And so I think we need to continue with that tradition, frankly, because America, what it is going to be, what was going to be 50 years, 70 years from now, we actually don't know. None of us know, right? And but that's the excitement of it all. That's the beauty of this experiment, to say that as long as we adhere to these fundamental values of freedom, of justice, and opportunity, that America in 50 years, 70 years from now is going to be awesome.
Right.
It could be more awesomer, I guess. That's not even a word. Right?
You're totally right. You're totally right. And you have to have that long view of things.
Right.
You in your Atlantic Monthly interview, you talked about what would happen if Trump was elected for your, and you were completely right. It's created a feeling of fear, but there is a long view of adhering to these values and
That's right.
I thought so much, as I was thinking about you serving on these different boards for these, different banks and different financial institutions, just about the 2008 financial crisis. Right. And just, it's another kind of exogenous variable. What effect has that had on your life, and what have you learned from it? And how is it related to your work with the Mission Asset Fund too?
Well, it's all about timing, right?
Yeah, it is. Timing is everything.
So we started our work in 2007, and then we started Lending Circles in 2008. And it was interesting because, of course, we didn't do it to time, the external environment. But at that time, we were all concerned about credit, right? Yes. Because our financial system was collapsing right before our very eyes. And so I remember, being curious about how we were getting a lot of press attention to our work. It was really because the press, they were so, they had they were learning about the credit markets and how they were collapsing, and they were very intrigued by how this group of poor people were coming together and lending and borrowing money with each other.
Right, so the rest of the society is having this liquidity crisis. No one can get a loan. The banks are shutting down, and you all of a sudden are thousands of people are coming in.
Yeah, exactly. And so I understood it from the reporter standpoint. They're like, oh, that's curious. Poor people lending money to each other. That's weird, right?
Yeah.
And so literally all of for in a course of 4 years, that was a story that we were telling. It's people, poor people can in fact come together and help each other, and there's a lesson there there's a lesson there for everybody else too, that that trust is fundamental.
Yes.
Trust is the essence of our credit system, so that financial institutions, if they mess that up,
Right.
in the case of 2008, and even in the case of Wells Fargo, when they mess up that trust that we've given to them, then that's bad for all of us. So we have to do that. And so one of the lessons that I've got from that is that having a healthy dose of mistrust is a good thing.
Yeah.
It's like, it's one of the things I tell our clients is like, in anybody that manages your money, just have a healthy dose. You don't have to distrust them completely, just a healthy dose, so that you can review your statement, so you can review your payments, so that there's a constant trust there. But because we developed a program in 2008, I think because of what was happening in the crisis, our program, our work and the mission was elevated quickly. As an example, as a good model for how to engage poor people.
Right. That's great. So one of our traditions at the forum is we have everyone write questions on cards, and Rebecca collects the questions, and then I share the questions with you. When you were consulting with, not Wells Fargo, but companies and the Federal Reserve, what kind of questions they ask of you, and what do you have to offer and contribute in those conversations?
Well, I try to, with the CFPB, I was, had the honor of being the inaugural chair for the Consumer Advisory Board.
Right.
And I've said in other boards as well. And the whole point of having those advisory boards is to basically, have like an honest conversation about what is happening on the ground. And so whether if I'm advising, Richard Cordray or the CEOs of these other companies, what I try to bring into those conversations, like, here's the reality of that we see with our clients. Here are their struggles. Here are the pain points. Here are the barriers that they're confronting. And then so that we can that way we can understand whether those barriers were created by them, either by way of the products or policy, so that way we can figure out how to remove those things. But what I bring to the table there is just trying to bring a clear sense of the reality on the ground, and that's a good thing for them to hear, right? Because sometimes people at those levels, they get isolated, from the realities on the ground. So by having those type of boards, it gives them a channel of communication, so that they can either try to figure out whether they need to correct action or correct course or not. And so that's how I see my role.
Yeah, this is a great question. How does your work inform your spiritual life? Are you ever discouraged in this political climate? And thank you for what you do.
Oh, thank you.
And I think of you wrote about your mother's spirituality at one point. So what keeps you going?
Yeah, I do get discouraged, but I have to fight that, just like all of us do. I mean, I think I sort of have to think about, there's a bigger thing, is a bigger calling to our work, which is, really kind of creating, preserving, the American experiment, the American promise, so that, any one of us, no matter where we're born, no matter what we look like, no matter, what our wealth was when we, came to this country or to this world, that we can actually develop our humanness, our spiritualness, so we can develop our human potential. And I believe in that, and I believe that, that we can actually do more to make that happen, for more people across our country. But it is discouraging sometimes. Sometimes when you look at the news and you see the course of action, you see the raids that are happening throughout the country now. You see families being torn apart, before our very eyes. People that are, that are contributing to this country. They're being forced to leave, and and then the kids that they leave behind. I mean, like, what's going to happen to them?
Exactly.
And so it's hard not to get discouraged, but I think precisely in those moments that's where my spiritual lessons from my mom come to bear, and then that's what keeps me going. I mean, one of the lessons that I have clearly in my mind from my mother, my mother's life was, she was literally in her deathbed. It was in 1980. She had days to live, and there were 6 of us kids, and she had other family members kind of come to her to sort of say, oh, so you don't worry about Jose, we'll take him, or Angelica or Santos, we'll take her. because they basically wanted her to take care of her, but there were 6 kids, right? But on her deathbed, she said, no, if you want to take one, you have to take them all. She didn't want us to be separated. She didn't want us to be torn apart. And so I think about like what kind of mind can say that, that she didn't want her 6 kids to be torn apart, and then so that was her demand. And sometimes you have to be, you have to be sort of like, you have to do that even when you're about to die, because that's what's important. Because she knew that by staying together, that's how we were going to be able to survive. And so being irrational in some ways sometimes was important. That's what's needed even in moments like that. So that keeps me going, and I think that kind of feeds my spiritual life, and because that really has been sort of like my true north, if you will. And so if she was able to do that in those circumstances, then there's no reason why we can't do what we need to do in order to continue to fight for social justice in our world.
Oh yeah, definitely. Is there a way to provide inexperienced student loans for immigrants, low-income students who may find their way out of poverty through education? So student loans for immigrant students.
Yeah, I mean, well, in California, yes, there's in different states have different rules depending on, on their legal status. But in California, we do have a law where a student can actually go to college and still pay for in-state tuition. But in some other states, an undocumented student, even though they might have been raised in that particular state, or their family pays taxes in that state, they go to college and then they have to pay out-of-state tuition. And then that basically, it's like sometimes quadruple the price. From
what basically makes it impossible.
Impossible, exactly.
So what about loans though? Like one of the problems, my wife is a law professor at USF, and many of her DACA students are having serious problems financing their education. And I guess I can imagine her asking this question. I mean, she's been going around trying to get loans, and there's who's going to co-sign, all those kinds of questions.
Yeah, it just gets a lot more complicated. But there are some grants. There are some in California they do qualify for California Pell Grants, the federal Pell Grants as well. I mean, loans are trickier because it all depends on the lender. How risk averse it may be. But there are some lenders that do lend to DACA recipients. Because they do have a social security number. They actually have that. And they can use that to work or to kind of engage in the financial marketplace. So it really then depends on what the lender wants to do or how risk they think this particular individuals may be. But I always underscore like, particularly for DACA recipients, like they have to sort of continue on and act as if, that number will give them, access to any financial product.
Right. Well, that's one of the things they talk about too, is just being able to work legally.
That's right.
Being able to have a social security, be able to have a driver's license, just how much that's given them. Although with the insecurity too of worrying about retribution from the federal government or making use of their information. Okay, what happens when someone defaults in a lending circle? In the small group, is it person to person? How does that happen? What happens?
So the way we constructed the program is that the MAF, we as an organization, take the loss. And so, again, in the past 8 years, our default rate is like 0.7%. Now we quantified that number to say like, well, how much of that have we actually lost in real money? And it was more like, I think like $32,000 that we've lost. Now, $32,000 is a lot of money, right? But in the perspective of like the cost of providing a program, it's actually,
I know,
pretty good.
Gosh, exactly.
Yeah. So and also people default not because they're of some malicious reason to say like, oh, I took the money, I'm not going to pay you back. It's just in a lot of cases, life happens.
Yeah, right. You fall off a ladder.
You fall off the ladder. I mean, in some cases, like one client, was in prison for some reason.
Oh, yeah, right.
Somebody else, they actually did get deported, or other people, they lose their job, and so life happens, to them, and in the case that we try to work with them to try to see if we can kind of correct the situation, but sometimes we just have to sort of cut our losses. But having a default rate of 0.7% is something that I brag about a lot,
right.
Especially to bankers, because they don't have such rates themselves. But us giving, our all participants a peace of mind is something really, really important to sort of say, look, they're coming into a program, they're getting a zero interest loan that they're making themselves, and we're managing it for them and reporting it to the credit bureau, so that the bigger lesson or the bigger goal here is for them to access loans in the marketplace, not through MAF, but through the banks, right? And so we kind of use that to make sure that they understand the ultimate goal here, not necessarily just this loan that they're making themselves.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about at all, but which is so interesting, I think, is just like building the technological infrastructure to make this happen. Can you say anything about that? I mean,
so when we started the program, ultimately this is it's like a loan servicing that we're doing, right? I mean, one of the things that I like to say is, like, when I was in college, fighting for social justice, that I wanted to change the world. That was my thing, right?
Right.
And I never thought that I was going to do that by being a loan servicer. I mean, that's,
through creating new software.
Yeah, exactly. Like being a fintech. Woo! Oh my God. So I never thought that was going to happen. But the reality was that, because these loans are so not in your conventional loans,
Right.
that all of the software and technology was built around these very traditional loan processes, that really we had to sort of kind of create our own software from scratch. And so we did that, because we had to sort of manage the sort of group lending that was going on.
Exactly.
But a lot of the software, it just had it as a lender to a consumers in a very one-directional way, right? And but having a circle, it kind of confused that, and so we were able to do that. I mean, to us, that was just sort of like a question that we needed to answer, and frankly, the technology was like the easiest thing to address.
Oh yeah.
Because we had some resources, thankfully, but we were able to engage with developers in a clear way for them to build what we needed to do. And so that was I mean, I don't want to say easy, but it was a solvable problem that we were able to solve it in a timely fashion. What has been harder to solve is this mental notion that we have in our heads as a society, that poor people are somewhat broken, deficient,
Right.
that they're somehow like
It's the
poverty is their fault.
meritocracy. It's the meritocracy.
Yeah, like the idea that the self-made person or the wealth gospel. I mean, like all these ideas, that's the hard thing, and that's what we're trying to sort of shift. And now to shift that is not technology, right?
Yeah.
It's really this.
Right. Completely. It's getting your message out.
Yeah, it's sharing stories. So it's like kind of getting people to contemplate a different reality for a second, to say, well, maybe poverty is not their fault. Maybe that's built into our structure. And if that's the case, then what do we need to do to correct that? Because how fair is it that person, just because they were born in that particular zip code to that particular last name, that their humanity will never be fully realized? Right. Why is that?
Yeah, that's completely what's at stake here.
Yeah.
Does the MAF concept of formalized lending circles work in other environments, e.g. West Oakland?
It actually does work in that environment.
Great.
The idea, lending circles, I mean, it was born in the Mission District, but we were able to sort of build relationships with other nonprofits across the country. And so now we're operating in 17 different states with about 55 different nonprofit organizations with a lot of different type of groups. We're working with the Asian community. We're working here in San Francisco with the LGBT Center.
Oh yeah, right.
So it's like non-immigrants, but LGBT community that is working with them. With other groups that work with the African American community in New York. And so it works a lot with a lot of different groups. Why? It's because, the idea of coming together and helping each other, again, nobody owns that idea. That's part of our human construct. That we need each other. And so no matter if you're Asian or you're African American, if you're gay and lesbian, or whatever you may be, you build relationships with people, right, in your own community. And so all we're doing is basically saying, hey, here's an idea that can actually work within that community and help them build their financial security nonetheless. And so again, so it's kind of like seeing beyond ourselves and saying like this idea of social capital is not, we don't own it. it's it's really again is we all have that, so we're just identifying that and helping them build upon that.
Right. What are some of the ways that being poor is actually more expensive than being wealthy, and how do you keep participants motivated when filling uphill financial battles?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. I mean, and being poor is expensive, and I'm glad they picked up on that point, because just to illustrate that, imagine this is that families that make $25,000 or less, they actually spend about 9.5 or 10% of their income on financial products.
Wow.
Imagine that, 10% of their income, they're spending it on financial products, whether they're paying on interest, on fees, or some other sort of transactional cost. 10%. I mean, do you pay 10% for your financial? I mean, who pays that? I mean, I think we get paid to engage in the financial system, right? Either by way of...
That's like tithing to the bank.
Exactly, right? So, but poor people, they're making $25,000 or less. That's what they do. Now, your average family in America spends about 10% on groceries.
Wow.
And groceries. So imagine that. So that's
what it is.
That's what they're doing. So because again, if they're not, if they don't have access to those, those responsible and cost-effective financial products that we are accustomed to, then they're paying, either on a check-by-check basis, right? And it becomes a lot more expensive. Or they're engaging on payday lending, and they're paying for, 500% APRs on smaller dollar loans. Now, I get smaller dollar loans all the time through a credit card. Every time I buy a coffee, that's a loan that I get to pay at the end of the month for free, right? But that's not the case, for low-income people. So, I mean, that's just one example. There's many other examples that illustrate how expensive it is, how, I mean, just recently, the San Francisco treasurer here, José Cisneros, actually wrote an op-ed talking about how even the city government actually, how they levy fees and fines is actually more detrimental for low-income people than it is for high-income individuals, right? And so it's not even just the financial institutions, but governments themselves.
It's like the equivalent to like a regressive tax, but in your fees.
That's
amazing.
Right. So like, you might get your car towed and you pay, $400, $500. That might be an inconvenience for us. But for somebody who's low-income, they can't pay for, come up with $400 or $500
so your car's impounded and you pay more.
Exactly. And so sometimes government actually kind of gets in the way in that sense. So by changing, I think, the storyline or the way we think about poor people, I'm glad to see that we're sort of, rethinking some of these practices, because sometimes what we do, to poor people actually makes things, worse. It makes it even harder for them to actually survive.
Yeah. Well, we're so grateful to have you today.
Thank you.
It's an early morning, and it was great for you to come across the bay for us. We have a few announcements. May 7th, I'm going to be gone out of town next week, but on May 7th, we'll be having the psychologist and ethicist Thomas Plant, who'll be talking about post-election stress disorder, which I think you'll realize is a real thing. As always, you're welcome to come upstairs for the 11 o'clock liturgy. Grace Cathedral is a house of prayer for all peoples. We rely on your support also, so if you can make a gift to the forum, we'd appreciate it. And Jose was talking about his pastor, Stephen Hale, who's a great preacher in the East Bay at Christ Church Alameda. And we're so glad that we got to have you this Sunday.
Thank you.
Instead of having you there.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to join their coffee hour later. So.
Great. That's good. Catch up with them.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Jose.
Thank you.
And we appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Yeah.